With a hospitable tilt of his head, the Doge said, "Per favore, signore," and offered the goblet to his chastened dinner companion. The poor man smiled timidly and wrapped two meaty hands around the goblet. He tried to drink his wine slowly, soundlessly, and this self-conscious attempt at delicacy allowed the wine to saturate his senses. Unaccustomed to such complexity of flavor, he drank the goblet down and finished with a lusty smacking of his lips. Flush with pleasure, he carefully placed his empty goblet on the lace tablecloth and turned to offer his thanks to the Doge. But, Marone! The man's smile twisted into a grimace. His forehead knotted like a ginger root, and he clawed at his throat. While he choked and struggled, his eyes spilled shock and confusion. He fell sideways off his needlework seat and tumbled headfirst onto the Turkish carpet with an inelegant thunk. His eyes glazed over with a dead man's stare. The Doge, a feeble, syphilitic old man, dabbed the corners of his mouth with a linen napkin, then heaved his royal personage off the chair. He steadied himself on the table edge with one liver-spotted hand, knelt over the corpse, and reached into the folds of his robe to bring forth a vial of amber liquid. He pried open the dead man's mouth, tipped the vial to lips already turning blue, and carefully dribbled in his elixir. With a grunt of disgust, the Doge poked his finger into the fetid mouth, pressing on the tongue to make sure the fluid trickled down the dead man's throat. When the vial was empty, the Doge released the sigh of a man who has completed a small but unpleasant task. He pulled out the lemon-scented handkerchief he always kept tucked in his sleeve, wiped his hands, and then pressed the handkerchief to his nose. He inhaled deeply, clearly relieved to be able finally to counter the peasant's stench. The Doge, clad in his cumbersome brocades and with his handkerchief pressed firmly to his nose, sat back in his chair and watched the corpse with small, critical eyes. Absently, he adjusted his sly red cap so that the blunt peak at the back stood up, like a middle finger pointed at God. The dead peasant had been an invited guest, but I, a street orphan, gained entry to the palace through the kindness of my maestro. I owe him, and all my teachers, everything. Without teachers, humankind would be sitting in a cold, dark, clammy cave, picking nits and wondering how grandfather started his legendary fire. I met my maestro when I was 14 or 15, but how could I know my true age? I don't know the date of my birth, though it hardly matters now. The peasant's murder occurred many years ago, in the year of our Lord 1498, the year the chef saw me stealing a pomegranate from a fruit stall in the Rialto and rescued me from my squalid life on the street. I remember that pomegranate well, the leathery red skin, the fleshy weight of it in my hand promising wine-sweet clusters of ruby fruit. As I lifted it off the pile, I imagined the satisfying crunch, the release of tangy perfume, the juices glazing my lips and running down my chin. Ah, that biblical fruit with its poignant umbilical tip, choice of the gods and food of the dead. I clasped it to my breast and ran. But the chef stepped into my path and grabbed me by the ear, saying, "That's not the way, boy." He took away my pomegranate. Indeed, I thought of it as mine, and he returned it to the vendor. My disappointment was spiked with anger, but before I could react, the chef said, "I'll feed you in the palace kitchen, but first, you have to wash." Marone! To eat in the Doge's palace, I would have washed every lice-infested orphan, every suppurating leper, and every diseased prostitute and every poverty-ridden calle of Venice. I mumbled, "Si, signore." "Andiamo." He kept a firm hold on my ear as we walked through the Rialto. We passed a baker from whom I'd often stolen bread, and the man gave a self-satisfied grunt, no doubt thinking I was finally off to be punished. We passed the fishmonger from whom I'd recently stolen a smoked trout, and the man raised his scaling knife to show me its wicked edge. We wended our way through crowds of shoppers who glanced at me and then nodded at the chef as if to say, "Good, you caught one of the rascals." We passed some of my scruffy and begrimed compatriots who watched us from shadowed corners with suspicious eyes. Being escorted off the street by a well-dressed man could be either very good or very bad. I might be headed for a warm meal given freely out of charity, or I might be in for some cruel abuse reserved for boys like me whom no one would